Research is time-consuming and often a big challenge for many students in university and in medical school. Dedicating my previous 6 to 8 months in research, I was able to gain 2 publications, and I want to use my advice and experience to help you guys breaking down research into simple steps, giving you everything you need to start your research venture. Just before we get started, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. We are close to 100 subscribers, and also head over to my Instagram at Iammedicar. I'm giving more of an insight and documenting my journey in medical school. And if you're an aspiring medical student, please head over to Medic Dojo. We are currently doing interview preparation for many students this year, so make sure you check that out. And without further ado, let's get into the research. First thing you'll want to bear in mind is look at the different ways you're able to get a publication in medical school. So for example, you might be able to get publication in research. This is something that I've done in COVID-19. You can also do something like an opinion paper discussing a topic. You can also get involved in like doing a case series or a case report on interesting cases maybe in clinical practice you may feel is important to raise. Or you can do something maybe a bit more smaller, like a letter to the editor. So you're writing a letter essentially to someone who's already done an article or research. You can actually talk about images, so medical images. You can describe them, and some journals allow you to do that, and that's another way you can get published in a journal. It's also important to explore the different journals you might want to publish in. So this is depending on what the audience of your paper is. So for example, if you're doing a paper targeted towards medical students, you want to look for medical student journals, so the Student BMJ and the British Student Doctor Journal. So doctors or consultants, you might want to consider the normal BMJ, the Royal College of Physicians. But make sure you look at whether journals actually have a PubMed ID index on it. It's really important when you start applying for your foundation training and your core medical training as well. Important to look whether it's been peer reviewed, and also look at the impact score. So impact factor. The impact factor is basically how big of an impact that journal has on kind of medical research. So the higher the impact factor, it means more people are likely to see your paper and it reaches a wider kind of range of audience. So always look out for that as well. And also make sure you look at whether they actually charge for your paper to be published. And you can always get financial support from your university for this. Now the first thing is you've got to make sure you're going to find the right clinical supervisor to support you in the project. Now what you can do to find out what research they've already been involved in. So you can search their credentials on PubMed database as well. You see kind of who they've collaborated with in the past. Have they worked with medical students in the past? You can ask these medical students how their experience has been with that research supervisor. And also look at what you're getting at, what you're getting out of the project. Are they giving you some sort of recognition, so like a co-authorship or something. Are they giving you a first or second author? It's very important when you're embarking on such a extensive project. The next thing you can do as well is you can ask your colleagues or medical students who are doing some research, or who they're about to start projects. So you can always collaborate with them on a project, and you can ask them about this if they're okay with it. So you've got to always remember that will you get a co-authorship in that paper if it does get published, because would that medical student get most of the recognition, or will you get some recognition? So it's important to balance that out as well if you're looking for to do collaboration. And if you want to start something yourself, think about in practice or in medical school, is there a clinical question you can formulate that really hasn't been looked into or answered? Especially this is where I took the advantage of COVID-19 as it's rapidly progressing. Not everyone knows much about the coronavirus, and that's where I looked at the opportunities. Okay, has someone actually looked into this part of things? And that's how I try to formulate my own clinical question. So firstly, does your clinical question actually matter? Will it actually make an impact into medicine, into the clinical practice? So for example, my question was looking at the hygiene adaptations that doctors were doing in the hospital and at home because at the time the coronavirus was spreading rapidly through households, and it's really important to protect the families of those who have doctors working on the front line. The next thing is it important? Is that research important to what's going on currently? Maybe it's looking at the effectiveness of a treatment, for example, or it's looking at the effectiveness of certain procedure on certain type of patients. Another factor is the research relevant? The question you're asking, is it simple, is it specific, and is it relevant to what you're trying to find out? It'll make it easier when you're actually carrying out the research. And also lastly, it's important to do a bit of background reading. So look at, is there a clear answer to your question already? Look at what other people have done previously, because if someone else has already looked into your clinical question, there's not really much point of you going on to it. It's going to be less likely, the journal to publish this. The journals want other people to read it, right? Read the journal. The only way they're going to do that is getting out really good, profound, impactful research. The first stage to research is trying to gain an ethical approval. Now, this can be a time-consuming process, but I'm going to make it easy for you. So usually your university or medical school might have like a research proposal form, and you'll have to basically fill this out. So basically it's essentially a whole research plan of how you're going to carry out the research. You're looking at all the different elements in constructing your project. So this can be about your clinical question, about the relevance of it, about the methods, how you're going to collect the data, different things like that. So my advice would be, make sure you get this reviewed and checked by another healthcare professional or someone who has done research before, to show the people, the committee, that this is something that's well thought out. The whole plan of the project. Try and actually look into how you're going to do these things, because when I formulated my research, my clinical question, there were loads of gaps that I didn't really consider, those things I didn't consider. So I read up on this, and this helped me conduct my project later on. So the next thing after you've gained your ethical approval is actually the data collection and analysis section. So it is a bit of a time-consuming process, and it will take a bit of time, but make sure you while this is happening, try and construct your paper, the foundations to your paper, the structure to your paper, so you don't waste time after you've done your data collection into writing up the paper. So if I go back to my example on my COVID-19 research, I came up with a qualitative survey. Now, I didn't just do the survey, I had to think of other things as well. So for example, firstly, the consent form. It's really important to gain this consent from individuals when they take part in the survey. So you have to construct this and make sure you inform the individual about everything, what's going to be done with the survey and how it's going to be used. Next thing is give them like an information leaflet. So again, similar to the consent form, just to give them the information about what this research is about, how it's going to be used, why they've picked that, why I've picked that individual, for example, to take part in the research. And also it's really important to find out how you're going to reach your target audience. Now, there are different medical registers. So for example, in my research, I used the alumni register for people who've just graduated from medical school, because I know that they might be working the front line, so it'd be important to get them involved. If you're finding this section difficult, you can always kind of recruit other people to help you in collecting this data, other healthcare professionals or medical students who might know these wide variety of individuals you'll need, so you can involve them in your research and they might gain something out of your research project as well. And lastly, you have to think of the statistical methods of how you're going to analyze the data that is coming in. So what I did in my research project is I used this kind of handy software called Prism. So Prism essentially allows you to kind of extract all the data and put it in a really easy to understand, simple, definable graphs. Able to find out if there's a statistical significance by doing these statistical kind of methods. And this was really useful because these are the most important findings you found from your paper. So the last thing you need to do is start writing up your paper. Start with introductions. The introductions to set the scene to the audience and should address the clinical question and why this is important to be answered, and this will be done through your research. The next thing is the methodology. So you've got to describe how you're going to collect, how you're going to conduct this research and the different methods you use to carry this out. And now results must be like a clear and concise description of all the findings you've done, and also make sure you include the numbers, statistics in the paper. And also remember to be consistent with how you're displaying your findings. Also, when you're including figures and tables, make sure you explain them and label them correctly as well, and make sure you reference them in the paper accordingly. And lastly is discussion. So make sure you pick out some of the key findings you feel is important to discuss about, and make sure you actually include some literature searching you've done to compare what other research has been done. This will help improve the validity of your paper and your application of your paper in clinical practice. So just a few more tips. Try and keep drafting and reviewing this with your supervisor. Try and get weekly meetings or monthly meetings with your supervisor and your co-authors to make sure everyone's on the same line. So lastly, you've done all this work, you've created the paper. Now it's time to submit it. Now you've got to remember that you can only submit your paper at one journal at a time. So because this can be quite time consuming, it's important to be patient and dedicated. It's important that you're able to handle those rejections, if those journals do come back to you, and make sure you do not give up. If one journal rejects you, keep going. I've been rejected by 2 or 3 journals. Because I remained patient on this research, I gradually got that publication. So that's the end of the video. I really hope you found this video really useful for those who are struggling to, kind of getting involved in research and how the research process is. And hopefully I can produce more useful content in the future on research as I progress to medical school. Please leave a like on this video, it'll be really useful, and also make sure you share this video with your friends and medical colleagues as well. Thank you very much and have a good day. Peace.